Frogs have had a surprisingly huge showing in Yu-Gi-Oh! For what they are. They're a bunch of small dudes that primarily exist on their own for the sake of spamming RONINTOADIN to the grave with Swap Frog, and then you summon a few monsters boosted by WETLANDS and deal a sizable amount of damage. When you're playing pure frogs, that's about all they're meant to do. That's what they were created with the intention of doing. With decks like Frog Monarchs treating them as easy tribute fodder, and the much more recent Paleos coming to the forefront of the metagame for a time by using the frogs as Xyz and Link material. This was drastically helped by Totally Awesome existing, a card that was intended for frogs and stayed in that niche relatively purely, at least compared to other really good cards from an archetype that isn't meta. But before Toad, and after tributing over them wasn't the best anymore, there was one weird time capsule of a deck that uses none of these strategies, yet is the inarguable best version of pure frogs we have ever seen. How does one even FTK with frogs, let alone do something so surreal as to win the World Championships with it? And if you like this content, be sure to subscribe as it really helps me out. Let me know what you want to see for my next video or the video after that in the comments below. Most cards in this combo are banned, so if you haven't heard of them, that's a-okay. I like to think of my channel as one where we can know the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh!, but I won't expect everyone to know all the obscure garbage like Creator of Miracles. So, let's go into a bit of detail. Essentially, this is how the deck worked out. You'd run your draw cards like Hand Destruction and Moray of Greed to get exactly what you wanted, and put frogs back into the deck. They won't be there for long, however. Swap Frog is optimal here, as you get an extra normal summon of, or send the main playmaker of the deck to the graveyard. You can send it to the grave because Salvage was the snake rain of its day, when literally just card advantage mattered, since it's a +1 most of the time. It adds the waters from your graveyard to your hand. So it's a way of searching the card from your deck to your hand with some extra steps. So whatever way you went, you have a Swap Frog on the field. Then you can normal summon the GOAT, SUBSTITOAD. Here's our first banned card. Banned because it can tribute a monster and summon a frog. No, this isn't an error on the card. It was intended to not be once per turn. This was the correct option. So now you tribute a frog to summon a frog until Kingdom Come, making sure that when you summon Swap Frog from it, you send SUBSTITOAD to the grave, because Swap Frog can send Aquas instead, and Substa-Frog isn't a card we can use. So, anyway, we mill our entire deck as far as we can, and we have a few options here. If we open the final piece, use it and win. If you don't, this is 2011, so you can still draw into it or just straight up pass turn just to get another card in your hand to hopefully get it. Crazy that they couldn't kill through a defense position frog and maybe a second one back then. What a game this is. That final piece, by the way, is Mass Driver, another banned card that tributes a monster on your side of the field to burn for 400. This could have been accomplished with Toon Cannon Soldier, but we're trying to FTK and have already used our normal summon, so while this card is unsearchable, it was the option that was actually possible to use. And after you mill all the frogs from your deck, you probably have like 15 cards total left, most of which draw, so you should be fine. After we play the spell, we've basically won. You tribute the frogs on the field, dealing 400 for each. RONINTOADIN will banish a frog from the graveyard to come back from the graveyard to the field, only to be launched directly into the opponent's face again. This will loop because we have like 24 frogs in the deck, more than enough to steal the game before your opponent could do anything. Your hand traps were DD Crow back then. Sorry, I mean, your hand trap was DD Crow back then. That's also why we run like 24 to 26 frogs, because you'd be able to have a few in your hand that you just couldn't quite pitch with swap, or a few could get banished and you'd be fine. Whatever works. If your opponent didn't open both of them to banish the 2 RONINTOADINs in your graveyard, or maybe even 3 to banish all 3 of them if you ran them, the deck was always going to do its thing. There was no counterplay. No Ash Blossom for years after this. Your main out was Hanawada, and that card is Dog Water. It's that simple. You just kill your opponent the same way every time. But you may wonder how that's possible when a side deck is a thing that exists, and you could just run better outs to this in game 2, like the aforementioned Dog Water Hanawada, which, you know, tech cards can be horrible, and if they win, you know. Well, Frog FTK thought around this. They started becoming Synchro Frogs in game 2, so your opponent with 3 Hanawadas in their hand is now down 3 cards in their hand, because with another banned but not incredibly make-or-break card, FISHBORG Blaster, you could go into Brionac, Scrap Dragon, any synchro that was really, really good at the time, and you could pretend game 1 wasn't your doing. It just kinda happened that way. It was like they wanted to distance themselves from the FTK, but still get the win from it. Notice how I'm not talking about the general meta at the time? Like, you know, I used the references in my Blue Eyes video. I was talking about Cosmos and ED Monarchs and Necros. Well, that's because in 2011, the other side of the table just didn't matter. You could do this going first or second incredibly consistently, especially for the time, because playing through one negate was at the same time not hard and not likely to be necessary. I could tell you they were up against Blue Eyes half the time and it would be the same thing. I could tell you that they were up against Drytron going second, and it might as well be the same thing for all intents and purposes. It just did not matter. The frogs would be launched, and you would be dead. Frog FTK is a premier example of how winning Worlds gets a huge target placed on your back for the next ban list. The banning of SUBSTITOAD, Mass Driver, and even FISHBORG Blaster led to this deck being fully unable to exist today. There is no functioning way to commit Frog FTK, unless you're playing Master Duel and you play that grass, mill a bunch of frogs and RONINTOADIN, and you have Toon Cannon Soldier, which you searched off your Toon table. It's incredibly clunky, and would it even be called Frog FTK at this point? On a side note, that idea of, you know, winning Worlds, you kind of get banned as your prize. I would like to make a video on that, kind of inspired because of Infernity's absolutely just dying. That's the Archfiend to 1 list. God, they won in 2014, and then Konami tried to make sure that they never won again. And then they became a part of a Tier 1 Pendulum engine. These things cannot die. I would like to catalog them. The funniest part of all of this is, SUBSTITOAD isn't technically the one to even break the deck, despite being the objectively most broken card here, and the one that's actually banned. It came out in the last GX set, Light of Destruction. Frogs proceeded to still do nothing, and SUBSTITOAD was pretty much just not played, because as insane as it is, it just didn't matter. It wasn't what frogs were trying to do, which is Wetlands Lamau. And then, a year after Light of Destruction, like a year or so after, The Shining Darkness comes out, where RONINTOADIN actually came out and was released, and shared its rarity with SUBSTITOAD. Common. Yep, they're both common, as is most of all of the other frogs, like Dupe Frog, or Poison Draw Frog, or whatever funny frogs you were running to show your personality. Almost the entire deck was able to be made from your old, like, when you were 7 years old, Everything I Have binder that you brought to school just to trade with people at school, and you did it purely based on the art or the rarity, and that was it. There were a few common cards that are meta. There always will be. But seeing a whole Tier 0 deck made almost entirely of them was beyond ridiculous, even if most of them were just cards that coincidentally had Frog in the name and could therefore be legally shot out of a cannon. The king is dead. Long live King SUBSTITOAD. If you liked this video, check out this one. I like this one. It's about a Mystic Mind cheater. Ooh, Mystic Mind hate. You want to click it? Ooh.